Kale stands within a flickering ring of chalked runes on the cold stone floor, his breath trapped in his lungs as though the very air rebels against him. The walls of the ancient temple are scorched and half collapsed, pillars leaning precariously toward the starless sky beyond the shattered roof. A faint glow pulses around his feet, and for a single, terrifying instant, it feels like time itself holds its breath. The moment stretches. Sparks of energy shimmer in the dark, and a strange, low hum resonates through the marrow of his bones. Then, with a sudden rush of impossible wind, a figure coalesces from swirling cosmic radiance, her presence overwhelming every sense he possesses. "You dare summon me, mortal?" Her voice is a clash of thunder and whispered prophecy, a shock that rattles Kale's teeth. He staggers back, pressing a hand to his chest, yet refuses to kneel. She stands before him in the center of the broken temple, white hair glowing faintly as though each strand has captured a fragment of starlight. Her skin glimmers with an otherworldly sheen, and her gaze, brilliant icy, locks on him with a force that feels like a blade to his throat. He doesn't speak immediately. He can't, not until he forces his lungs to function again. "Let me guess," he finally manages, voice rasping. "You're the one the legends warned me about. Elira." She narrows her eyes. Sparks of power crackle at her fingertips, and the air distorts around her, warping like heat haze. "You speak my name so freely," she says, stepping forward in a single fluid motion. "I could crush your mind for daring to bind me here." Kale clenches his jaw. A wave of dizziness threatens to buckle his knees, but he forces himself to stay upright. "I need your power," he says, even as his stomach twists. He knows exactly how dangerous she is. He's read the ancient scripts, the half-burned scrolls that detail a goddess once worshipped by starfaring civilizations. But desperation has pushed him to this ritual, to a place beyond caution. "And you need my blood oath to remain in this realm?" Her expression flickers with surprise. She hadn't expected him to be so direct, so unafraid to meet her stare. For a moment neither speaks. The silence sizzles thick with tension. He can feel her presence like a physical weight pressing down on his chest. She is more than beautiful, she is overwhelming, like a storm given form, like a raging star. "You presume much," she murmurs. Then, with a snap of her fingers, the glowing circle flares. Kale shouts, his entire body jolting with searing pain. The runes beneath his feet burn white-hot for a heartbeat before the light dims again, leaving him gasping on one knee. "I owe you nothing, mortal," she says, her voice dripping with cosmic fury. He lifts his head, sweat streaming down his face. "You're right," he forces out, teeth gritted. "But you're here now, bound by the right of the old ways. If you kill me, you'll be sent back to that prison beyond the veil." She doesn't confirm or deny his words. Instead, she studies him with an intensity that makes him feel naked before her gaze. Her voice softens into something more dangerous than outright anger. "Why do you want my power?" Kale staggers to his feet, pressing a trembling hand to the hilt of his sword. He'd be a fool to draw it against a goddess, but the weight of the blade steadies him. "I have a debt," he says. "A vendetta. The empire that cast me out, my own father, the king, bargained with lesser gods. They sold our people into servitude. I want to end them." Elira's lips curl in a humorless smile. "So you awakened a greater god to do your bidding?" He matches her stare. "I awakened you because I've tried every mortal method. I've bled, I've fought, I've sacrificed everything. And still they stand. So yes, I turned to a legend, an imprisoned goddess who might hate them even more than I do." Her laugh is sharp, echoing in the empty temple. "Hate them? They are beneath my notice, mortal. But I despise the ones who imprison me. If your father's empire is entangled with those lesser deities, I may have reason to humor you briefly." He exhales, a tremor of relief laced with fear. She's not turning him to ash, not yet. "Then help me," he says, "and I'll free you fully from this binding." She takes a single step forward. He swallows hard. The sense of her presence intensifies, pressing down on his mind, flooding his veins with a rush of conflicting sensations: terror, fascination, something akin to awe. He can't tear his eyes from her face. Every detail of her is perfect yet alien, the angle of her cheekbones, the subtle patterns of starlight dancing beneath her skin, the faint luminescence that trails from her hair. "You have a bold tongue," she says. "I wonder if your will is as strong as your words." Before he can reply, the ground shudders. A deep rumble echoes from somewhere beneath the temple's foundations. Cracks spiderweb across the floor, and dust rains from the broken ceiling. Cale staggers to keep his balance. Elira's eyes flick to the side, then back to him. "Your summoning has stirred the old wards," she says. "This place collapses. If you value your life, mortal, then show me you can survive this." Cale doesn't need a second warning. He bolts toward the archway leading out, but a chunk of stone crashes down, blocking the path. He curses, whirling to see if there's another exit. Elira stands still, unaffected by the tremors, as though the shifting earth is no more than a mild inconvenience. He spots a narrow corridor, half hidden behind a toppled statue, and scrambles toward it. Elira follows, her movements graceful. The corridor leads deeper into darkness. "Are you sure this is wise?" she asks, her tone laced with mocking curiosity. "Unless you have a better idea," he snaps. "We don't have time to debate." He's forced to duck beneath a low beam, stepping over rubble and half-buried carvings. The corridor twists, the walls etched with ancient glyphs. He can't read them, but he feels a faint thrumming beneath his feet, like pulses of energy. A wave of heat washes over him, and he realizes they're nearing the temple's heart, where the summoning magic might be anchored. A massive stone block collapses behind them, sealing off the way they came. He curses again. "We're trapped." Elira raises an eyebrow. "Trapped? In a place my power can reshape if I so choose?" She extends her hand, and faint light dances along her palm. Cale braces, half expecting her to disintegrate the walls or something equally dramatic. But the light fizzles, and she frowns. "What's wrong?" he asks, voice edged with concern he can't quite hide. She tries again, focusing her power. A swirl of cosmic brilliance forms, then gutters out like a dying candle. "Your blood oath has bound me to mortal limitations here," she says through gritted teeth. "I can't fully manifest my abilities. I can tear open a path, but it will cost me. And it will cost you too." He steps closer, ignoring the thunderous rumbles above. "How?" Her gaze locks on him, intense. "Your life force fuels this bond. Each time I use the deeper cosmic powers, it will drain you." Cale's heart pounds. He already feels the edges of fatigue from the summoning, a dull ache behind his eyes. But if they don't escape, they'll both be crushed. "Do it," he says. "I'll handle the cost." Elira nods once. Then she closes her eyes, lifting both hands. A shimmering sphere of pale light blossoms around her. Immediately, Cale feels a searing pain in his chest, as though invisible claws are digging into his ribcage. He grits his teeth, refusing to scream. The stone in front of them cracks and groans, splitting down the middle. The air howls with displaced energy, and he sees the corridor beyond, free of rubble. Gasping, he stumbles forward as the protective sphere dissipates. Elira's face is momentarily pale, as if the effort taxed her as well. The tremors intensify, dust falling like rain from the ceiling. They hurry through the gap she created, and after several breathless steps, they emerge into a larger chamber that must have once been the temple's heart. Here, the architecture is still intact, though battered by time. Columns ring the space, carved with celestial symbols. At the center, a raised dais supports a half-sunken altar, worn smooth by centuries of neglect. A single shaft of moonlight pierces the broken ceiling high above, illuminating drifting motes of dust. Cale's eyes adjust, and he realizes there's a door on the far side, a huge slab of metal etched with more glyphs. "That might lead out," he says, pointing. Elira doesn't respond immediately. She stares at the altar, lips parted. Her eyes reflect a swirl of conflicting emotions, anger, sorrow, something deeper he can't name. He steps closer, bracing for her wrath, but she simply runs her fingertips across the ancient stone. This place was once a seat of power, she says, her voice hushed. Mortals came here to worship me. They brought their pleas, their offerings, and in return, I gave them knowledge of the stars. Now it's nothing but ruin. Kale can't help a twinge of sympathy. Though she's a goddess, she looks almost haunted by memory. Still, he reminds himself that pity for a goddess could be a dangerous trap. The empire you once knew is gone, he says. A new one has taken its place, my father's empire, propped up by lesser deities who are too cowardly to face you. She exhales softly, turning her gaze to him. So you used the scraps of the old rites to call me forth, hoping to harness my hatred? Hatred? Maybe, Kale admits. But I also hoped that you'd be willing to take vengeance on those who betrayed you. They fear you. That's why they sealed you beyond the veil of stars in the first place, right? Her eyes flicker with starlight. Yes. They feared me. A thunderous crack overhead jerks them both from the moment. More debris rains down. Kale gestures toward the sealed door. We can talk about your grudges after we're out of here. He runs, ignoring the ache in his limbs. The dais trembles beneath his boots, and the columns groan. Elira follows, her strides long and effortless. When they reach the metal slab, Kale skids to a halt, examining the glyphs. He can't read them, but he recognizes the same swirling patterns from the scrolls he studied. It's sealed by a cosmic lock, Elira says, pressing a hand against the door. I can break it, but it'll drain me again. He finishes, nodding. Do it. Before the roof caves in. She closes her eyes, inhaling. Kale braces for the jolt of agony. When it comes, it's like molten steel flooding his veins. He bites down on his lip, tasting blood. The glyphs glow, lines of radiant power spidering across the metal. The door groans, then slides open with a grinding screech. They dash through just as the chamber behind them collapses, columns shattering, dust billowing in a suffocating cloud. Kale coughs, staggering forward. Elira presses a hand to his back, and though her touch is cold with the residue of cosmic energy, he can't help noticing the gentle pressure of her palm. The passage leads them upward. They climb a narrow stairwell that spirals toward faint moonlight. Each step is a battle against crumbling stone and the weight of exhaustion. Finally, they emerge onto a ledge overlooking the temple's collapsed outer wall. The night air is sharp against Kale's sweat-soaked skin. Stars glitter overhead, though many are veiled by swirling clouds of dust from the temple's partial destruction. Kale slumps against the wall, gulping air. Elira stands beside him, surveying the ruin. In the distance, the silhouette of a once great city stretches across the horizon, its rooftops broken, its towers leaning. The empire that now rules these lands built new fortresses elsewhere, letting places like this rot in disuse. He turns to her. We survived. Now what? She arches a brow. You tell me, mortal. You claimed you had a plan. He lets out a humorless laugh. Summon you was the plan. But if the cost of your power drains my life, I won't survive long enough to see my vengeance through. She tilts her head, studying him with that intense gaze again. Perhaps there is a way to strengthen the bond without killing you, she muses. But it would require a deeper pact. A dangerous ritual that merges part of my essence with your mortal soul. He feels his stomach flip. Dangerous for me or for you? For both, she says simply. If I bond with you further, I risk losing the last vestiges of my immortality in this realm. But if I don't, you might perish the next time I wield my true power. Silence stretches, broken only by the distant crash of falling rubble. He stares at her, heart pounding. She is terrifying, enthralling, and everything he never imagined a goddess could be. He can still feel the echo of her energy pulsing in his blood, like an addictive rush. If we do that, he says slowly, then we'd both be vulnerable. But we'd be unstoppable together, wouldn't we? She offers a slight smile, something that holds no warmth, only the promise of cosmic storms. That depends on your resolve, mortal. Do not think this is some mortal tryst. The energies at play would tear an ordinary man apart. He forces himself to stand straighter, ignoring the tremors in his legs. I'm no ordinary man. She regards him for a moment, then turns her gaze to the horizon. Let us find shelter first, she says, voice cool but with a thread of urgency. The night is not safe, and I sense wards from lesser gods still active in these lands. They may sense my presence. He nods, swallowing the dryness in his throat. Follow me. There's a hidden outpost a league from here, if it still stands. We can rest there. She doesn't respond verbally, just gestures for him to lead the way. As they descend a broken path littered with shattered statues and overgrown vines, Cale can't help glancing at her from the corner of his eye. She moves like a warrior queen, each step measured, her posture regal despite the circumstances. He wonders if she's truly as invincible as she seems, or if she's just as uncertain about this strange alliance as he is. The path takes them through a narrow canyon behind the temple. The moonlight casts eerie shadows on the rocky walls, and the wind howls through the crevices like lamenting spirits. Cale leads, careful not to trigger any hidden traps left by the old guardians. His senses prickle. The place feels alive with residual magic. Elira says nothing for a long while, and he finds himself wishing she would speak, if only to break the tension. But the memory of her first words, that command, still resonates in his mind. She demanded subservience, but he refused to kneel. Somehow, that refusal sparked a wary respect between them, or perhaps it's just a truce born of necessity. They climb over a fallen obelisk, and the canyon opens up to a starlit sky. On the far side, an abandoned fortress juts from a rocky hillside. Its walls are partially collapsed, but Cale sees a few intact towers. He recognizes the silhouette. This was once a watch post for the Old Kingdom, centuries ago. He pauses, glancing at Elira. There, he says quietly. We might find shelter inside. She nods, her luminous eyes reflecting the distant torches that flicker in the fortress courtyard. We are not alone, she remarks, her voice low. Cale curses under his breath. Bandits, probably. This place is on the fringe of Imperial territory. Raiders use these ruins as hideouts. Elira's lips curl in a half-smile. Shall I show them the folly of crossing a goddess? He meets her gaze. The memory of that draining pain is still fresh. Not yet, he says. We can't afford to waste your power on small threats. She lifts her chin, not pleased by the idea of restraint, but concedes. Then lead on, mortal, and I will watch your back. They move quietly, skirting the fortress wall. Cale finds a section of crumbled masonry that allows them to slip inside undetected. The courtyard is overgrown with weeds, and a few makeshift tents indicate recent occupants. He spots a group of armed men huddled around a dim fire near the main gate, their laughter echoing in the gloom. He signals for Elira to stay close. They hug the shadows, stepping carefully across debris. A sudden noise, a loose stone skittering across the ground, makes Cale freeze. One of the men around the fire lifts his head, peering into the darkness. Cale's heart hammers, but he remains still. After a tense moment, the man shrugs and returns to his conversation. Cale exhales silently, then continues. He finds a half-collapsed tower near the rear of the courtyard that seems unoccupied. They slip inside. The interior is dusty, but the roof is partially intact, and it provides a modicum of cover from prying eyes. Cale leans against the wall, exhaustion flooding him. Elira surveys the small space. This will do, she says. She lifts her hand, a faint glow illuminating the cramped interior. Cale tenses, expecting another wave of pain, but she must be using only a sliver of her power this time. He feels a slight tug at his energy, but nothing unbearable. He slides down to sit on the floor, resting his sword across his lap. We should sleep in shifts, he says quietly. If those men discover us, we'll have to fight. She inclines her head. I require less rest than you, she says. You sleep first. Her tone is imperious, a command rather than a suggestion. Cale almost bristles, but he's too drained to argue. He closes his eyes, letting the tension seep out of his muscles. Despite the discomfort of the stone floor and the lingering fear of discovery, his exhaustion quickly pulls him into a fitful sleep. When he dreams of cosmic voids and swirling star fields. He hears her voice in the darkness, sees her face framed by an explosion of light. Then he jolts awake, unsure how long he's slept. Elira stands near a narrow window, her gaze fixed on the moonlit courtyard. She glances over her shoulder at him. "You stirred," she says softly, her voice no longer dripping with contempt. Cale rubs his eyes. "I had strange dreams." She turns fully, crossing her arms. "Our bond is new, unrefined. You may see fragments of my memories, my essence, in your sleep. Such is the nature of linking mortal and divine." He stands, rolling his shoulders. The ache in his chest is still there, but duller now. "We can't stay here forever. We need to move on at first light, find a way to strengthen this bond without draining me to death." Her gaze flicks away, a brief hesitation that doesn't go unnoticed. "There is a ritual," she admits, "but it must be performed under specific conditions. We need a conduit, an artifact from the old empire, something that can stabilize the energies between us. Without it, the attempt might kill you." He thinks back to the scrolls he studied. "I recall references to a relic called the Star Heart. Some texts said it was destroyed, others claimed it was hidden in the catacombs beneath the citadel of Iseron." Elira's lips part slightly. "The Star Heart was once used by mortal kings to siphon cosmic power. I never knew what became of it after my imprisonment. If it still exists, it would serve our purpose." "Then we find it," Cale says, determination flaring in his eyes. "And with it, we can break the hold those lesser gods have on the Empire." She offers a slow nod, but there's a flicker of something else in her expression, concern, perhaps? "Be warned, mortal. The Star Heart was coveted by many. If it still lies beneath Iseron, you won't be the only one seeking it. Others, ambitious warlords, twisted sorcerers, even the gods who fear me, might guard it or attempt to claim it." Cale's lips curve in a mirthless grin. "I've spent my life running from battles I couldn't win. Not anymore." Her gaze lingers on him, and in that charged silence, he feels the raw tension between them. It's not purely hostility. There's something else there, a slow-burning ember that he can't quite name. He remembers the jolt of her power coursing through him, how his heart pounded not just from pain, but from the exhilarating closeness of a being so far beyond mortal comprehension. She breaks the moment with a curt nod. "Then rest a while longer. We move at dawn." He doesn't argue. He sinks back to the floor, but sleep comes more slowly this time. He can't stop thinking about the look in her eyes or the faint tremor in his own chest when she's near. He wonders if she feels it too, the strange, inevitable pull that draws them together even as they bristle with distrust. He tries to banish the thought, reminding himself that this is no ordinary partnership. She's a goddess, and he's a mortal seeking vengeance. Lust, affection, or anything else between them would be a complication. Still, as he drifts off, the echo of her cosmic presence hums at the edges of his mind, a quiet promise of power, danger, and perhaps something neither of them is ready to admit. He wakes to the pale light of dawn filtering through the cracks in the tower. Elira stands at the window, watching the sky. When he joins her, he notices the bandits below are still asleep or unaware. He checks his gear, ensuring his sword is secure. "Let's go," he whispers. They slip out of the tower, carefully navigating the rubble until they reach the courtyard's perimeter. Elira points to a section of wall that's collapsed enough for them to climb over. Cale helps her up, though she hardly needs the assistance. Her movements are effortless, more akin to a predator than a human. Once over, they hurry away from the fortress, heading south toward the rumored location of Iseron's ruins. The journey is arduous. They cross barren fields and wind-scoured plains where imperial outposts once stood. Now only scattered patrols of soldiers roam these territories, hunting for rebels and thieves. Cale leads them around the main roads, sticking to less traveled paths. Elira seems unbothered by the terrain, though occasionally she casts a sidelong glance at Cale, as if gauging his stamina. Around midday, they take shelter beneath a rocky overhang. The sun beats down mercilessly, and Cale finds a small trickle of water in a crevice, enough to fill his flask. He offers some to Elira, but she shakes her head. I need less nourishment than you, she says. He drinks, then pours a bit on a rag to wipe the sweat from his brow. Tell me more about this Starheart ritual, he says, voice echoing slightly in the shaded alcove. How exactly does it bind us? She sits on a smooth boulder, crossing her legs with regal poise. The Starheart is a fragment of primordial power, older than the pantheon that sealed me. If we fuse it with our bond, it will create a conduit that allows my cosmic essence to flow without draining you to the brink of death each time. But it will also deepen our connection. You will feel my presence in your mind, my emotions, my desires. And I will feel yours. He tries to keep his expression neutral, but a flicker of unease crosses his face. That sounds intense. She inclines her head. It is. Most mortals would be overwhelmed. But your blood oath has already set you on this path. He exhales slowly, thinking of the alternative, dying every time she unleashes her powers. I'll manage. She studies him. Your resolve is admirable, Kale. But do not mistake this for mere convenience. The more we merge, the more our fates intertwine. If you die, I will lose my anchor in this realm. If I am banished again, you will feel the backlash. He meets her gaze. Then we'll just have to make sure either happens. She almost smiles, but the expression fades. I once thought mortals existed only to worship or fear gods. You've shown me there is more to your kind. But know this, the path we walk is fraught with peril. The lesser gods who serve your father's empire will not sit idle. They know of my return, and they will move against us. Let them come, Kale says, eyes cold. I have reasons enough to face them. And you. He pauses, unsure how to phrase his thought without seeming either subservient or presumptuous. You have your reasons too. Elira's gaze drifts away, as though recalling memories older than the mountains around them. Yes, she murmurs. I have my reasons. They resume their journey, covering as much ground as they can before dusk. The land transitions into rolling hills dotted with thorny bushes. At sunset, they find a hidden hollow near a stream to rest. Kale starts a small fire, carefully shielding the flames with rocks. Elira sits across from him, the firelight dancing on her features, giving her an almost ethereal glow. Tell me of your father, she says abruptly, breaking a long silence. Kale's jaw tightens. He was once a good king, or so I believed when I was a child. But as I grew older, I saw the bargains he made, the cruelty he allowed in the name of power. He forged pacts with minor gods who demanded sacrifices. When I objected, I was cast out. They branded me a traitor. She watches him intently. You hate him. Yes, Kale admits, voice raw. Not just for what he did to me, but for what he's done to our people. They live in fear, forced to worship gods who demand blood and pain. I want to end that tyranny. Elira nods slowly. Your resolve is fierce, but you will face more than mortal armies. The gods allied with your father will sense my power. They may strike at you to weaken me. He pokes the fire with a stick, sending sparks swirling. That's why I need you, he says quietly. I'm no fool. I can't face divine beings alone. For a moment, she says nothing. The night air grows still, the crackling of the fire the only sound. Then she speaks, her tone surprisingly gentle. You may not be alone in this, Kale. Our bond, as reluctant as it began, binds us both. His gaze lifts to hers. The warmth of the flames casts shadows across her face, but he sees something new in her expression, an unspoken empathy. It's subtle, but it's there. He nods once, acknowledging the shift between them. They settle into a tense companionship for the night. Elira keeps watch, while Kale tries to sleep. His mind churns with thoughts of the days ahead, of the Starheart, of the unstoppable foes that lurk in the Empire's shadow. And, unbidden, his mind also drifts to her, how her presence both alarms and enthralls him. At dawn, they continue southward. The terrain grows rocky, the vegetation sparse. Kale notices fresh wagon tracks in the dirt, signs of imperial supply lines or merchant caravans. They stay off the main roads, but inevitably they encounter patrols. One morning, as they crest the hill, they spot a small group of Imperial soldiers escorting a covered wagon. The soldiers wear the insignia of the lesser god Galrin, known for his savage thirst for offerings. Cale's jaw sets. He hates Galrin's troops more than most. These soldiers are known to harass villages for tributes. Elira reads his expression. We can bypass them, she says, though her tone suggests she's open to another option. He hesitates, scanning the wagon. They might have supplies we need, he says. But more importantly, they might have prisoners. Galrin's troops often transport sacrifices. Elira tilts her head. Do you wish to free them? He nods. I won't let them continue if they're carrying innocents. She considers him for a long moment. Then let us deal with them quickly. I will not waste cosmic power on such vermin, but I can lend you a fraction of my strength. His heart quickens. He's seen what even a fraction of her strength can do. Fine, he says. We strike fast. They descend the hill, moving swiftly through the tall grass. Cale draws his sword, and Elira walks beside him, her hand crackling with faint energy. When they're close enough to see the soldiers' faces, Cale calls out, Release whoever's in that wagon, and I might let you live. The soldiers startle, drawing weapons. One of them, a burly captain, sneers. You dare command us? We serve Galrin, mortal filth. Cale braces for a fight. The captain raises his sword, barking in order for the others to attack. Cale lunges, his blade flashing in the morning sun. He's outnumbered, but the edge of Elira's power hums at the back of his mind, sharpening his reflexes, lending a preternatural precision to his strikes. He disarms one soldier, parries another, and drives his blade through a third. Elira, meanwhile, moves like a phantom. She doesn't use a sword, she doesn't need one. A flick of her wrist sends the soldier crashing to the ground, clutching his head in agony as if a cosmic echo reverberates in his skull. Another tries to strike her from behind, but she sidesteps with fluid grace, then taps him lightly on the shoulder. The man collapses, eyes rolling back, as though his spirit has been briefly ripped from his body. The remaining soldiers fall back, fear evident in their eyes. Cale presses forward, knocking aside their spears. In moments, the skirmish is over, the patrol scattered or slain. The captain lies on his back, wounded, cursing them both. Cale levels his sword at the man's throat. Who's in the wagon? The captain spits blood. Slaves for Galrin's altar. You'll gain nothing by freeing them. The Empire will hunt you. Cale's eyes flash with anger. They already do. Elira steps up, her gaze cold. Shall I end him? The captain's eyes widen at her voice, recognition sparking. You're... Cale clenches his jaw. He's not worth the cost of your power, he says, lowering his sword. He can spread word of what happened here. Let them know a goddess stands against their cruelty. She stares at Cale for a moment, then nods curtly. He steps back, leaving the captain alive but wounded. The man scrambles away, eventually limping off toward the nearest outpost. Cale knows he'll report this, but perhaps that's for the best. Fear might sow confusion among the Empire's ranks. They open the wagon, finding a handful of shackled villagers. Most are thin, terrified, their faces etched with hopelessness. Cale quickly finds the keys on a dead soldier's belt and frees them. One woman sobs with relief, clutching Cale's arm. Thank you, she whispers. He nods, uncomfortable with gratitude he feels he doesn't deserve. Go, he tells them. Find safety. If you have family or friends in nearby villages, warn them. The Empire is collecting tributes. They scatter, some hugging each other, others limping away. Cale watches them go, heart heavy. Elira stands beside him, silent. He can sense her thoughts, a faint echo of cosmic disapproval mixed with reluctant respect. You risked your life for strangers, she finally says. They're not strangers, he replies, wiping blood from his sword. They're my people, even if I'm exiled. She regards him with that inscrutable gaze. Your actions stir something within me. Once, I was worshipped for my benevolence. Then I was betrayed. I wonder if your empire's people are worth saving. He slides the sword back into its sheath. They're worth saving from the tyranny of false gods. Whether they deserve your mercy is another question. They continue on, leaving the carnage behind. Kale's mind churns with the realization that word will spread quickly. They'll have less time to reach Iseron before the Empire dispatches more formidable forces, or even their patron gods. Days pass in a blur of travel and near constant vigilance. Kale and Elira dodge patrols, hide from flying constructs rumored to be guided by lesser deities, and push their bodies to the limit. At night, they take turns sleeping. The tension between them shifts with every close call. Sometimes she saves him with a burst of divine might. Sometimes he shields her with cunning or skill, reminding her that he is no mere puppet. Their bond grows in these trials. He begins to sense her emotions, a flicker of satisfaction when he triumphs in a skirmish, a flash of anger when they encounter evidence of the Empire's cruelty, a quiet sorrow that lingers whenever she gazes at the night sky. She, in turn, seems to adapt to his mortal limitations, using her power in precise bursts rather than reckless displays. In stolen moments, he catches her watching him with an intensity that makes his heart pound. He tries to deny the attraction he feels, chalking it up to the adrenaline of constant danger, but it's there. It's in the way his gaze lingers on her whenever she turns away, in the sudden dryness of his mouth when she stands too close. He senses she feels something as well, a pull that goes beyond the bond, a curiosity or hunger that simmers beneath her cold exterior. But neither speaks of it. Eventually, they arrive at a high ridge overlooking a vast desert valley. In the distance, ancient spires protrude from shifting dunes, the remnants of Iseron, once a jewel of civilization, now a sun-scorched ruin. Kale's heart quickens. If the Starheart is anywhere, it's somewhere beneath those crumbling towers. They descend into the valley, the heat oppressive. The closer they get to the ruins, the more they sense an undercurrent of power, like a distant drumbeat vibrating in the sand. Elira's expression grows guarded. "There is magic here," she says, voice hushed. "Old wards, perhaps. They may recognize my essence." Kale glances around warily. "Let's hope they don't see us as enemies." They pick their way through fallen columns and half-buried statues. The desert winds moan through the empty streets. Sand has swallowed much of Iseron, but a few structures still stand, a broken cathedral, a collapsed library, and a central plaza dominated by a towering obelisk. Kale leads them to a stairwell he discovered referenced in the half-burned map. It spirals downward into darkness, presumably leading to the catacombs. They descend, torches lit, the air growing cooler and stale. The catacombs are a maze of corridors lined with tombs. Symbols of ancient kings and queens adorn the walls, along with murals depicting starry skies and celestial beings. Elira traces her fingers over one depiction of a winged goddess, half lost to time. "They once honored me here," she says softly. "Or a version of me they imagined." Kale steps closer, shining the torchlight on the mural. "What happened?" She lowers her hand. "Mortals became enamored with lesser gods who promise quicker rewards, power, wealth, easy miracles. My teachings demanded reverence for the cosmic order, which required patience and humility. So they turned from me. Then, those lesser gods conspired to seal me away." He hears the bitterness in her voice and wonders if it mirrors his own feelings of betrayal. "We'll make them regret it," he says, surprising himself with the fierceness in his tone. Elira meets his gaze, a flicker of warmth behind her starlit eyes. "Yes," she murmurs. They press deeper, following a faint pulse of energy that Kale feels through the floor, a subtle vibration in his bones. They come to a massive stone door engraved with constellations. The design is partially shattered, the door slightly ajar, revealing a swirling darkness beyond. Kale's hand tightens on the torch. "The Starheart must be in there." Elira nods. "Be ready. If it's still active, it will react to our presence." They push the door open, stepping into a vast chamber lit by an eerie, bluish glow emanating from a large crystal set atop a dais in the center. The crystal pulses like a heartbeat, illuminating the skeletal remains of those who died here centuries ago. Ornate pillars surround the dais, each carved with glyphs that hum in resonance with the crystal. Kale's eyes lock on the crystal. He feels its power tug at him, stirring the blood oath magic that binds him to Elira. She stands beside him, lips parted, an almost reverent expression on her face. "It's more intact than I expected," she says softly. "Be careful." Kale takes a cautious step forward. The crystal flares, sending a wave of shimmering light across the chamber. He staggers, feeling a rush of vertigo. Elira grasps his arm to steady him. "It senses our bond," she says. "It's reacting." He nods, swallowing hard. "So, how do we use it?" She draws a shaky breath. "We stand at the dais together, and we invoke the merging. The star heart will link our essences more completely, stabilizing the flow of cosmic power." Kale steels himself. "And if it kills me?" Her expression darkens. "It won't. I won't let it." They approach the dais. Each step feels heavier, as though gravity itself is pulling them closer. When they stand before the crystal, Elira lifts her hands, chanting in a language Kale doesn't understand. The glyphs on the pillars glow, responding to her voice. Kale feels the surge of energy intensify, a swirling maelstrom of cosmic force that radiates from the star heart. Elira turns to him, placing one hand on his chest. "Open yourself to me," she commands, her voice resonating with divine power. He closes his eyes, focusing on the bond they share. Immediately, he feels her presence flood his mind, her ancient memories, her fury, her loneliness, her unyielding determination. He gasps, and she tightens her grip, steadying him. The star heart's glow intensifies, beams of light stabbing outward like rays of a miniature sun. Kale's heartbeat thunders in his ears. He can sense the cosmic currents swirling around them, binding their souls in a vortex of light and shadow. Pain slices through him, but it's a different kind of pain than before. This is transformation, not mere draining. He feels the blood oath expanding, rewriting parts of his mortal essence to accommodate a fragment of divinity. Elira cries out, her voice echoing across the chamber, as if she, too, is being reshaped. In that crucible of power, their minds collide. He sees visions of her imprisonment beyond the veil, eons of solitude. She sees his exile, the betrayal by his father, the guilt he carries for every life he couldn't save. Their emotions bleed together. A swirling confusion of fear, desire, anger, and longing surges between them. Then, in a flash, it ends. The chamber falls silent. The star heart dims, returning to its steady pulse. Kale collapses to his knees, panting. Elira staggers, bracing herself against the dais. For a moment, neither can speak. He lifts his head, meeting her gaze. There's a new awareness in her eyes, an intimacy born of shared consciousness. She can feel the echo of his heart, and he can feel hers, a silent rhythm that now beats in tandem. "How do you feel?" she asks, her voice hoarse. He breathes deeply, testing his limbs. "Stronger," he admits, surprised. "And you?" She closes her eyes, a faint tremor passing through her. "I feel mortal vulnerability, yet also a deeper well of power. It's exhilarating and terrifying." He manages a weak laugh. "We've just turned ourselves into something new, haven't we?" She looks at him, and in her expression, he sees not just a goddess, but a woman standing at the edge of something unknown. "Yes," she says, her voice barely above a whisper. Before they can say more, a sudden rumble shakes the chamber. The pillars vibrate, and a gust of stale air rushes through the door behind them. Kale grabs his sword, heart lurching. "What was that?" Elira's eyes flash. "We're not alone." Dark shapes appear at the chamber's entrance, armored figures wreathed in sickly green light. At their center stands a tall, robed figure whose face is hidden behind a mask etched with runes. Kale recognizes the insignia of one of the Empire's lesser gods, Talithus, a deity associated with necromancy and shadows. The masked figure steps forward, a mocking tone in his voice. "So it's true. The traitor prince has awakened the celestial queen." He lifts a hand, tendrils of greenish energy swirling around his fingertips. "You will not leave this place alive!" Kale and Elira exchange a glance. He feels the new bond stirring within him, a swirl of cosmic and mortal power fused by the Starheart. The robed man's minions, undead soldiers, from the looks of their vacant eyes, advance. Kale clenches his sword, feeling an undercurrent of Elira's power flowing through him. Elira steps beside him, her voice echoing with a divine resonance that sends chills down Kale's spine. "You dare challenge me in my domain?" The masked man laughs, a hollow sound. "Your domain is rubble, forgotten goddess. Talithus claims these catacombs now. And soon, he will claim you." Kale's pulse thunders. He and Elira move as one, launching into battle. She raises a hand, and a beam of starlight lances from her palm, striking the nearest undead soldier. It disintegrates in a flare of cosmic fire. Kale darts forward, sword blazing with a faint aura he's never seen before. He cuts down another soldier, the blades slicing through rotted armor with surprising ease. The robed man chants, summoning tendrils of green energy that lash out. Elira erects a shimmering barrier, but it flickers, and Kale feels a drain on his strength. Yet it's not as crippling as before. The Starheart's influence buffers the worst of it. He pushes forward, hacking through the undead. They fight as a coordinated force, Kale's mortal skill meshing with Elira's divine might. The robed man snarls, conjuring a swirling vortex of shadow that engulfs the dais. "You will not escape Talithus's wrath!" he bellows. Kale and Elira press in. She unleashes another burst of starfire, forcing him back. Kale slips behind the dais, flanking the necromancer. With a swift strike, he slashes at the man's side. The robed figure hisses, stumbling. Elira seizes the moment, chanting words of cosmic banishment. The green vortex sputters. The necromancer tries to counter, but Kale drives his blade through the man's chest. With a final gurgle, the masked figure collapses, his conjured magic dissipating. The remaining undead crumble into lifeless heaps. For a moment, the chamber is quiet, save for Kale's ragged breathing. He wrenches his sword free, turning to Elira. She stands radiant in the fading light of the Starheart, her eyes fixed on him with an intensity that makes his heart skip. He wipes sweat from his brow. "We need to leave before more of them come." She nods, though her gaze lingers on him. "We are stronger now, Kale. But they will keep coming. The Empire, the lesser gods, they fear me, and they will fear you, too." He nods, a grim smile tugging at his lips. "Good. Let them." They exit the chamber, carefully retracing their steps through the catacombs. The bond between them thrums with new life. Kale can sense her presence at the edges of his thoughts, and he suspects she feels his as well. Despite the danger, a strange excitement churns in his gut, an anticipation that goes beyond mere survival. When they emerge into the harsh sunlight outside, the ruins of Iseron spread before them like a labyrinth of sand and broken stone. They find a spot to rest among the fallen columns, away from prying eyes. Kale sets down his pack, then turns to Elira. "Now that we have the Starheart's power, what next?" She looks out over the desert, her hair shimmering in the midday sun. "We confront those who betrayed me, and those who subjugate your people. We strike at the heart of your father's empire, tear down the altars of these lesser gods." Kale feels a surge of adrenaline. "Then let's go. The longer we wait, the more they prepare." She meets his gaze, and he senses the conflict within her. There's anger, vengeance, and something else, an undercurrent of longing that mirrors his own. "Soon," she says, stepping closer. He can't ignore the way his heart hammers when she's near. The tension between them is a living thing, coiled and electric. Her eyes, reflecting faint motes of cosmic light, draw him in despite every warning in his head. She lifts a hand, letting her fingers graze his cheek. The touch is gentle, yet charged with the power that now binds them. He exhales, and in that breath, he realizes how dangerously close he is to crossing a line he never expected to approach. "You feel it," she murmurs. "Don't deny it." He swallows hard, remembering the rule he set for himself: never lose sight of the mission. But with her so close, that resolve falters. I do, he admits, voice low. Her gaze flicks to his lips, then back to his eyes. We are linked by more than a ritual. Your defiance, your courage, it resonates with me. He should step back, but he doesn't. Instead, he closes the distance, drawn by a force he can't fully name. She's taller than him by a fraction, her posture regal, yet he senses a tremor of anticipation as he leans in. Their lips meet in a clash of conflicting desires, anger, need, triumph, and fear. It's not a gentle kiss. It's a collision, a struggle for dominance. She grabs his collar, pulling him closer. He tangles a hand in her shimmering hair, heart pounding so loudly he can hardly think. The taste of her is like stardust and lightning, searing his senses. When they break apart, he's breathless, his mind reeling. She regards him with a fierce intensity, as though she's surprised by her own actions. Don't mistake this for weakness, she warns, though her voice trembles slightly. He shakes his head, still reeling. I wouldn't dare. They stand there, chests heaving, the desert wind whipping around them. For a moment, the world shrinks to just the two of them and the bond that pulses with renewed energy. Then reality seeps back in, the knowledge that they're in a hostile land, that enemies lurk behind every dune. Elira steps back, regaining her composure. We should move, she says, her voice regaining that cool, commanding edge. The Empire won't wait for us to indulge in mortal passions. Kale exhales, nodding. Right. They gather their things and press onward, leaving the catacombs behind. Though neither speaks of what just transpired, the air between them is charged with a new awareness. Every glance carries an undercurrent of tension, every brush of hands sets off sparks. He tries to focus on the path ahead, on the mission, but the memory of that kiss, and the possibility of what it means, lingers like an unspoken promise. They cross the desert, heading toward the Imperial heartlands. Over the next few days they face new challenges, ambushes by zealots, monstrous creatures twisted by godly magic, and the constant threat of being tracked. Each time, they emerge victorious, their synergy growing. She calls upon Starfire more often now, and the draining effect on Kale is bearable, thanks to the Starheart's infusion. Late one evening, they find a ruined watchtower near a dried riverbed. Inside, they set up a small camp. Kale lights a fire while Elira inspects the cracked walls. He notices she's been quiet since their earlier kiss. He can sense her turmoil, flickers of longing, caution, even anger at herself for feeling anything at all. He approaches her, resting a hand on the hilt of his sword. You're distant, he says softly. She casts him a sidelong glance. I am not accustomed to mortal intimacy. He nods, unsure how to respond. I'm not asking for anything, he finally says. Just honesty. She turns fully to face him, crossing her arms. The bond we share is dangerous. If we grow too close, we risk losing our edge. Emotions can be a liability in war. He exhales, stepping closer. I know. But we can't pretend it's not there. Her gaze hardens, but he senses the conflict beneath. If we indulge these impulses, we risk everything. He lifts a hand, almost touching her cheek, then stops. We also stand to gain something, he says quietly. Trust, unity. We fight better when we understand each other. She closes her eyes, taking a moment to breathe. You speak of trust, yet you still carry a mortal cynicism. I see it in your dreams. You doubt me. You fear betrayal. He lowers his hand. Yes, I do. But I'm trying not to let that stop me. Silence stretches. He hears the wind whistling through the tower's cracks, the distant howls of night creatures. Finally, she opens her eyes, and he sees a flicker of vulnerability. We are bound, Kale. Whether we like it or not. Perhaps we should see where that leads. He nods, relief mingling with an odd sense of anticipation. We should. They don't kiss again, not that night. But they sleep closer, their backs against the same wall, sharing warmth in the chilly desert wind. He drifts off with the comforting sense of her presence in his mind, no longer an invading force but a companion, a partner in the truest sense. Morning finds them back on the road. They near the borders of the Empire's core provinces, where Kale's father rules from a grand citadel built atop the bones of conquered kingdoms. The land is greener here, dotted with farmland and small villages. Imperial patrols are more frequent, and the presence of lesser gods is palpable. Shrines and altars line the roads, each dedicated to a deity that demands worship in exchange for petty miracles. As they move through these lands, Kale's anger grows. He sees how the common folk live in fear, forced to offer tithes to these shrines. He sees the crest of his father's house on banners, reminding him of the betrayal that haunts his memories. Elira notices his growing rage, and though she says little, she radiates an echoing fury. She hates these gods who usurped her worship, who sealed her away. One afternoon, they come upon a village in the midst of a forced ceremony. Soldiers gather the townsfolk in a central square, demanding they kneel before an idol of the god Zathra. Kale tenses at the sight. The villagers look terrified, and the soldiers bark orders. A priest stands by the idol, chanting. Elira's eyes narrow. This is what they do in my absence. They force worship. Kale grips his sword. We can't take on an entire garrison, he mutters, counting at least 30 soldiers. She raises a brow. Do you doubt me? He sets his jaw. No. But we must be strategic. If we cause a massacre, the entire empire will descend on us. She exhales, considering. Then we free these people quickly and vanish. Let this be a warning to the empire. They circle around, entering the village from a narrow side street. Kale spots a vantage point on a rooftop overlooking the square. They climb up, careful to avoid notice. From there, he can see the entire gathering. The priest raises a knife, preparing to cut the palm of a trembling villager as an offering. Elira's voice is cold. I will not watch this. She leaps down with preternatural grace, landing in the square amid startled gasps. Soldiers shout in alarm, leveling spears and crossbows at her. Kale drops from the roof, rolling to absorb the impact. He springs up, sword in hand. The priest sputters. Who dares interrupt the ceremony of Zathra? Elira's voice reverberates with divine power. Your false god has no dominion here. The soldiers rush forward. Kale parries a spear thrust, then slashes at the attacker's legs. Elira extends her hand, a shimmering wave of force knocking several soldiers off their feet. The villagers cower, unsure whether to flee or cheer. A crossbow bolt whizzes past Kale's ear. He ducks, rolling behind a stack of crates, then darts out to disarm another soldier. Elira strides forward, ignoring the priest's frenzied chanting. With a flick of her wrist, she snuffs out the small flame on the idol's altar. The priest recoils as though struck, crying out, Blasphemy! Kale sees a squad of soldiers rushing Elira from behind. He sprints to intercept them, blocking the first sword strike with a clang that jars his arms. He counters with a thrust that pierces the soldier's armor. Another tries to flank him, but Elira hurls a crackling orb of starfire that incinerates the man. Kale feels the drain on his strength, but it's not as severe as before. The Starheart's power hums in his blood, fueling him. Within minutes, the remaining soldiers lie scattered or unconscious. The priest attempts to flee, but Elira seizes him by the collar, lifting him effortlessly. Tell your god that Elira has returned, she hisses. Then she throws him to the ground. The villagers stare in stunned silence. Kale wipes sweat from his brow. Go, he tells them, voice steady. You're free. For now. A few brave souls step forward, murmuring thanks, but most are too frightened to speak. They recognize Elira's divine aura, yet centuries of indoctrination make them fear all gods. She senses this and says nothing, turning away. Kale follows her out of the square, leaving the villagers to process their sudden liberation. They vanish into the countryside before reinforcements arrive. Word will spread quickly. Kale knows the Empire will respond with greater force. But he also knows they've lit a spark of hope, or fear, among the people. The goddess once forgotten walks the land again, and she has a moral champion at her side. As they travel, the adrenaline of the fight fades, replaced by a throbbing awareness of each other. The bond they share pulses in the aftermath of conflict, and the memory of their earlier kiss hovers in the back of Kale's mind. He tries to focus on the plan, to confront his father, to shatter the Empire's alliance with lesser gods. But the tension between him and Elira simmers, refusing to be ignored. They camp near a rushing river one evening. Kale strips off his armor to wash away the grime of travel. Elira stands at the water's edge, watching him with an unreadable expression. He feels her gaze like a physical caress. He turns, water dripping from his hair. "Something on your mind?" She steps closer, the moonlight reflecting on her pale skin. "We are growing stronger together," she says, her voice low. "And yet I feel a conflict within you, a hesitation." He sets his jaw, unsure how much she already senses. "I'm torn between what I want and what I fear. I've lost so much already. Letting someone get close, it's dangerous." She lifts her chin, regal even now. "And what do you want?" He exhales, wiping water from his face. "I want revenge on my father, to free the people from the tyranny of these false gods. But I also—" He stops, unable to find the words. She moves closer, her presence overwhelming his senses. "You want me," she finishes for him. His breath catches. He doesn't deny it. "Yes," he says, voice barely above a whisper. Her eyes glitter with starlight. "Then take what you want," she says, stepping into his space. He closes the distance in a heartbeat, their lips crashing together in a heated tangle of desire and pent-up frustration. This time, there's no immediate separation, no abrupt recoil. They yield to the pull, hands roving across damp skin and divine contours. He feels her power crackle against his flesh, and she feels his mortal pulse hammering beneath her fingertips. They stumble onto the riverbank, half falling among the soft reeds. Their breathing is ragged, mingling with the rush of the water. She kisses him fiercely, her teeth grazing his lower lip. He growls, capturing her mouth again. It's not gentle or timid, it's a battle, a raw collision of need. She pins his wrists for a moment, smirking at his surprise, then he twists free, rolling her beneath him. For a fleeting instant, he sees uncertainty in her eyes, as though this intimacy is more terrifying than any cosmic battle. He presses a soft kiss to her throat, feeling her pulse race. She arches against him, starlight dancing in her hair, and he surrenders to the heat coursing through his veins. The night sky bears witness as they cross a threshold neither can fully articulate. It's a union forged in defiance and tempered by danger, an intimacy that transcends the boundaries of mortal and divine. When the haze of passion finally recedes, they lie entwined breathless, listening to the quiet murmur of the river. He props himself up on one elbow, gazing at her. "Are we insane?" he murmurs. She meets his gaze, a rare softness in her expression. "Perhaps," she says, brushing a strand of hair from his face. "But we have chosen this path. There is no turning back." He feels the truth of her words echo in his mind. They have crossed lines, magical, emotional, that can't be undone. They've embraced a bond that binds them more deeply than any vow. They eventually return to the fire, dress, and share a silent meal. The air between them is thick with unspoken understanding. In the flickering glow, she finally breaks the silence. "When we confront your father, it won't be just him. The lesser gods will be there, arrayed in force. We must be prepared." Kale nods. "We'll gather allies if we can. There are rebels who resist the Empire, though they fear the gods." She tilts her head. "Then we shall teach them not to fear. With me at their side, they can stand against the false deities." He sees the old fire in her eyes, the goddess who once commanded armies of mortals in ages past. He wonders if he's about to witness the birth of a new legend, a union of mortal grit and celestial wrath that will reshape the land. They set out at dawn, traveling toward the last known stronghold of the rebel forces, nestled in the mountains beyond the Empire's farmland. Along the way, they liberate small villages, dismantling altars dedicated to lesser gods. Their reputation grows, and rumors spread of a radiant goddess and a vengeful prince cutting a swath through imperial territory. By the time they reach the rebel stronghold, a ragged band of fighters emerges to greet them. Their leader, A scarred woman named Ceres regards Elira with suspicion, but she cannot deny the stories of divine might that precede her arrival. Kale reveals his identity, and though some rebels distrust him for his royal blood, they eventually agree to hear him out. In a torchlit cavern beneath the stronghold, Kale addresses the assembled rebels. He speaks of the Empire's cruelty, the false gods who demand blood. He speaks of the goddess who has returned to free them from tyranny. Elira stands at his side, silent but imposing, her presence filling the chamber with awe. Some rebels kneel, some stand in defiance, but all listen. Ceres finally steps forward. "We've fought the Empire for years," she says. "But we cannot stand against gods. Even if you are who you claim to be, how can we hope to win?" Elira answers, her voice resonating through the cavern. "You will not fight alone. I was sealed away once, but I have returned stronger than before. These lesser gods fear me. Together, we can shatter their dominion." Ceres exchanges glances with her fellow rebels. "If we join you, the Empire will bring all its wrath upon us. Are you prepared for that?" Kale nods. "We are prepared to face whatever they throw at us. We've already stolen the Star Heart from their grasp. We've disrupted their rituals. Their fear is growing. This is the time to strike." Murmurs spread through the crowd. Some speak of prophecies, others of doom. Eventually, Ceres steps forward again, dropping to one knee. "Then we stand with you. Better to fight for freedom than to live in fear." A chorus of agreement follows. The rebels pledge their support. Plans are made. Scouts are sent to gather intelligence on the imperial capital. The final confrontation looms on the horizon, a clash that will decide the fate of the Empire, the lesser gods, and the mortal realm. In the days that follow, Kale and Elira help the rebels fortify their stronghold, training them to fight not just mortal soldiers but the minions of divine beings. Elira shares knowledge of wards and glyphs that can weaken a god's manifestation in the mortal plane. Kale organizes the rebels, using his tactical mind and his intimate knowledge of the Empire's weaknesses. Between drills and planning sessions, Kale and Elira steal moments together, their bond deepening. Sometimes, it's a heated exchange of kisses in a secluded corner. Other times, it's a quiet conversation under the stars, sharing fragments of their pasts. The more they learn about each other, the more they realize how alike they are in their sense of betrayal, their thirst for justice. But with each passing day, the Empire mobilizes. Reports come in of entire legions marching toward the mountains. The lesser gods, enraged by Elira's return, empower the imperial forces with monstrous constructs and deadly enchantments. The final showdown seems inevitable. On the eve of the battle, Kale and Elira stand on a cliff overlooking the rebel encampment. Torches flicker below as hundreds of fighters prepare for war. He feels her presence at his side, warm despite the chill mountain wind. She looks at him, her gaze solemn. "Are you ready?" He nods, though a knot of dread coils in his gut. "As ready as I'll ever be." She takes his hand, and he senses her divine essence thrumming in his veins. "We fight together," she says. He squeezes her hand. "Together." At dawn, the Imperial army appears, stretching across the valley like a sea of steel. War horns echo, and lesser gods manifest as spectral figures above the ranks, each vying for dominion. The rebels, though outnumbered, stand firm, bolstered by the presence of Elira. Kale rallies them, his voice cutting through the fear. The battle erupts. Imperial catapults hurl flaming projectiles. Rebel archers return fire. Elira strides into the fray, unleashing beams of starfire that carve swaths through the Imperial ranks. Kale fights at her side, cutting down soldiers who dare approach. He feels her power fueling him, guiding his blade. Then, a thunderous roar splits the sky. One of the lesser gods manifests fully, a towering, horned figure wreathed in swirling dark clouds. It raises a colossal weapon, striking the ground and sending shockwaves that topple rebel formations. Elira braces, summoning a cosmic barrier that shatters the next blow. Kale helps the rebels regroup, leading them in a countercharge. Elsewhere, monstrous constructs, golems of twisted metal and bone, crash into the rebel lines. Ceres and her fighters engage them, using the glyphs Elira taught them to disrupt the construct's magical cores. The battlefield is chaos, screams, clashing steel, bursts of arcane light. In the midst of the carnage, Kale spots a familiar banner. His father's personal guard. The old king stands atop a war chariot, flanked by priests chanting incantations. To empower him. Kale's heart twists with rage and sorrow. He pushes forward, cutting through the Imperial soldiers. Elira follows, her fury evident in the blazing aura that surrounds her. Finally, Kale reaches the chariot, sword dripping with blood. His father stands there, aged but still formidable in gilded armor. The priests recoil at the sight of Elira. The king's eyes widen, then narrow in recognition. "Kale," the king says, voice dripping with disdain. "You dare return with this abomination?" Kale's grip on his sword tightens. "Abomination? She's a goddess you betrayed. And I'm the son you cast aside." The king sneers. "You were weak, unfit to inherit my throne. Now you consort with the very being that threatens our divine alliances." Elira's eyes blaze. "Your alliances with lesser gods end today." The king laughs, a hollow sound. "My allies are more powerful than you know." He gestures to the priests, who chant a final incantation. A swirling vortex of black energy engulfs the chariot, merging with the king's armor. He roars as unholy power courses through him, transforming him into a monstrous figure wreathed in dark flames. Kale steadies himself, feeling Elira's power surge in response. She raises her hand, summoning starlight that collides with the king's dark aura. The clash sends shockwaves that knock soldiers and rebels alike off their feet. The king charges, swinging a massive sword of crackling black energy. Elira meets his blow with a pillar of starfire, and the collision blinds Kale for an instant. When his vision clears, he sees Elira straining to hold back the king's augmented strength. Kale leaps in, slashing at his father's flank. The blow draws dark blood, but the king backhands him with terrifying force, sending Kale sprawling. Elira cries out, unleashing a torrent of cosmic flames that scorch the ground. The king staggers, but doesn't fall. His twisted laughter echoes as he presses the attack. Kale struggles to his feet, ignoring the pain that lances through his ribs. He can feel Elira's desperation through their bond. She's pouring more power into the fight, and it's draining them both. He rushes in again, trying to flank the king. Elira times her strike, distracting the king with a burst of starlight. Kale slashes downward, his sword infused with cosmic energy. This time, the blade sinks deeper, cracking the king's corrupted armor. The king roars, black flames spewing from the wound. Elira seizes the moment. She channels a final surge of power, ignoring the toll it takes on Kale. Her eyes blaze like twin suns, and she hurls a concentrated beam of pure starfire at the king's chest. The black armor disintegrates under the assault, and the king lets out a final, agonized scream. When the light fades, the king collapses, smoke rising from his mortal shell. The dark energy dissipates, the lesser gods hold over him broken. Kale stands over the body, sword trembling in his hand. He feels no triumph, only a hollow ache. His father is gone, and with him, a lifetime of unresolved pain. Around them, the imperial forces falter. The lesser gods withdraw, their manifestations weakened by the death of the Empire's primary conduit. Rebels rally, driving the remaining soldiers into a rout. The battle is won, but the cost is staggering. Bodies litter the field, smoke hangs in the air, and the wounded cry out for aid. Elira sags, her cosmic aura flickering. Kale rushes to her side, catching her before she falls. He can feel the exhaustion radiating through their bond. "You did it," he murmurs, cradling her against him. She gazes up at him, her eyes dimmer now. "We did it," she corrects, her voice faint. In the days that follow, the Empire collapses into disarray. The lesser gods, robbed of their champion, slink back to their hidden realms or fade altogether. The rebels, led by Ceres, establish a new order, one that vows to end the tyranny of forced worship. Some propose making Kale the new king, but he refuses. "I've seen what power can do," he says. I'd rather serve as a protector than a ruler. The rebels accept his decision, though many still look to him for guidance. Elira, meanwhile, regains some of her strength, though the final battle took a toll. She can remain in the mortal realm, thanks to the Starheart, but she senses that her true immortality has changed, tempered by her bond with Kale. One evening, as the smoke clears from the ravaged battlefield and the wounded receive care, Kale and Elira stand on a hillside overlooking the remnants of the imperial capital. The sky is clear, stars shining bright, a fitting backdrop for a goddess who once commanded the heavens. He takes her hand. She doesn't pull away. "We've done what we set out to do," he says quietly. She nods. "The empire is broken, the lesser gods scattered. The people are free to choose their own path." He glances at her, remembering the battles they fought, the bond they forged, the moments of shared vulnerability. "What about us?" She turns, her luminous gaze searching his. "We remain bound. By power, by choice, by something deeper." He draws her closer, heart pounding with the memory of their journey. "Then stay," he whispers. "Stay with me." She lifts a hand, resting it against his cheek. "I will not abandon you. Mortal or not, you've proven yourself worthy. You fought by my side, you shared my burdens, and you refused to kneel even when the world demanded it." He brushes a strand of hair from her face. "Then what do we do now?" She smiles, a rare, genuine smile. "We shape a new age. No more false gods. No more tyrants. If the people wish to worship me, let it be of their own accord. If they wish to stand beside me, let it be as allies, not slaves." He returns her smile, a warmth blooming in his chest. "I'll stand with you. Always." In that moment, the wind shifts, carrying the scent of renewal. The night sky spreads above them, infinite and full of promise. She leans in, pressing her lips to his in a kiss that tastes of starlight and hope. This time, it's not a clash of fury or desperation, it's a shared vow, sealed by the bond that unites them. When they break apart, she whispers against his lips, a soft echo of the promise that started it all. "Kiss me," she says, voice thrumming with cosmic resonance, "and I'll make you a king among mortals." He smiles, cupping her face in his hands. "Then consider me forever enthralled, my goddess." And beneath the vast canopy of stars, they forge their new destiny, together, undivided, an unbreakable union of mortal will and celestial flame, ending the story not in uncertainty, but in a promise fulfilled and a future bright with infinite possibility.